At 1845, the late sun glinted off the canopy of a row of parked T6 Texan II trainers lined neatly on the ramp. The wind carried the faint scent of burnt JP8 and hot concrete as Erica Collins stepped out of her pickup. Dust streaked along her boots. Her flight suit was faded at the seams. Velcro fuzzed from years of missions. Knees slightly creased where she'd crouched too often under wings to inspect landing gear. She slid her aviator sunglasses into a chest pocket and walked toward the polished glass doors of the Valmont Grill, a white linen establishment nestled just outside the fence of Nellis Air Force Base. Inside, the air turned instantly cooler. Jazz hummed low beneath soft clinks of wine glasses. A hostess in a black sheath dress spotted her approach and offered a quick glance that flicked down, then up again, pausing just long enough to pass judgment. Erica gave a small nod, asked if there was a table available for a short gathering later in the week. Her tone was polite, even warm. As she explained, she was hoping to host a quiet dinner for a few aircrew to mark the anniversary of a recovery op from several years back. The hostess smiled tightly. She adjusted the iPad on her podium and said their private rooms were unavailable. Everything was fully reserved, she said, though her voice held the lilt of someone improvising a lie they didn't feel the need to polish. Erica waited. The woman's eyes lingered on her flight suit and boots, then shifted beyond her shoulder. A couple stood behind Erica. The man wore a tailored blazer with no tie. The woman a necklace that looked like it cost more than a month of combat pay. The woman leaned in, stage whispering about dress codes and how even custodial staff should probably use the side door. The man chuckled and added something about a discount lunch counter nearby. Erica didn't turn. Her shoulders stayed square, her hands still resting calmly at her sides. The hostess cleared her throat and lowered her voice, almost conspiratorially. She suggested Erica try the place across the street, said it might be more suited for takeout or casual uniforms. The line hung in the air for a beat too long. Erica took a slow breath. The air smelled like rosemary and arrogance. She nodded once and asked if she could just speak to a manager, knowing exactly how this played out in other cities, in other uniforms. The hostess looked surprised. Then she waved toward the back, reluctant, as if hoping her supervisor wouldn't actually show up. As she did, her nails tapped the screen nervously. Erica stayed where she was, eyes drifting to the art on the wall, some abstract shapes that tried too hard. She heard the click of heels approaching, felt the soft hush fall over a nearby table as heads turned slightly, their curiosity polite but definite. It wasn't the first time airports, hotels, car rentals, lobbies where people assumed she was some underpaid base tech or spouse waiting to pick someone up. That old, familiar veil of dismissal was something she had worn more often than her dress blues. Still, it pressed heavy every time. And every time, she reminded herself it wasn't her burden to carry. The manager arrived in a dark suit, fresh out of graduate school or at least eager to project it. His smile had teeth but no warmth. He listened half-heartedly, said there were strict dress codes in the main room and that, respectfully, military fatigues did not qualify. He didn't look at her eyes when he said it. Instead, he thanked her for her service with the kind of tone that had learned to weaponize politeness. Erica nodded again. She didn't argue, didn't mention medals or ranks or the number of students she had walked through their first solo flights. She thanked him and stepped back into the early evening heat, where the last traces of daylight stretched long over the desert asphalt. Behind her, the door shut with a whisper. The sound of laughter floated faintly through the glass, but she didn't look back. She pulled her phone from her side pocket and checked the time. 18:53. No messages, no missed calls, just the quiet rustle of her boot steps as she crossed the lot, back toward her truck. She reached the door, then paused, rested her hand on the side mirror and stared at the horizon for a moment. Somewhere, beyond the gates of the base, student pilots were finishing debriefs, Some of them might already be at the O Club, sipping sodas and going over flight logs. She smiled faintly at the thought, then climbed into the cab. The ignition clicked. Diesel rumbled low. In the side mirror, Valmont Grille's sign glowed gold against the night. At 1856, just as Erica was reaching for the door of her truck, a voice called from behind. It wasn't the hostess. This one had more control in his tone, more polish. She turned to find a man in his early 30s walking briskly toward her, sleeves crisp, tie knotted with textbook precision. He introduced himself as the assistant manager, thanked her for stopping by, and asked if they could speak for a moment in private. She followed him back inside, not because she expected anything different, but because she understood the game. Some conversations had to be let play out. They stopped near the bar, just far enough from the guests to keep the illusion of discretion. He smiled the way consultants do before explaining how they're not the right fit for your business. He said he appreciated her service. He said it with that tone that sounded like a statement, not a sentiment. Then he explained that Valmont Grille had a dress policy, not formal, necessarily, but aligned with what he called refined expectations. His hands made small gestures near his waistline, tracing invisible lapels. He pointed out, carefully, that while uniforms had meaning, they didn't quite meet the spirit of the ambiance the restaurant curated. Erica didn't respond. She simply watched him speak, her eyes steady but unreadable. He continued, mentioning that many guests dined there to escape the rigidity of their own professions. It was, as he put it, a sanctuary from uniforms of all kinds. His voice was low, calm, and each sentence ended in a soft, upward lilt, like he was offering advice rather than exclusion. As he spoke, he gave a small nod toward the hostess stand. Another staff member, who had begun moving toward the table area, subtly turned on her heel and walked away. Two servers passed by without acknowledgement. One even averted her gaze entirely. No one interrupted. The temperature in the room hadn't changed, but Erica felt something colder now. He assured her this wasn't personal. It was simply about setting the right tone for all guests. He said it again. Not personal. She nodded slightly, still said nothing. A man in a nearby booth glanced up over his wine glass. Curious. The assistant manager noticed and shifted his stance to block the view. He concluded by saying he hoped she'd understand, and that he'd be happy to help her find alternative accommodations that would be, in his words, more aligned with practical attire. She met his gaze then. Not long. Just enough. The kind of look that didn't ask for anything, didn't beg for fairness or argue for room. It just stayed still. That look unsettled him more than any pushback would have. He offered a business card as a peace offering, printed on thick linen stock, embossed lettering. She didn't take it. She just gave him the same quiet nod she'd given the hostess earlier and stepped back toward the entrance. As the door closed behind her once again, the assistant manager exhaled and smoothed the front of his jacket. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't check it. Behind him, a server leaned in to ask if the woman was military. He shrugged and said he wasn't sure, probably just base support or admin. Outside, Erica walked the few steps to her truck. The sun was nearly gone, and the lot lights had flickered on. She leaned one arm against the side panel and let the silence wrap around her like armor. They didn't have to say the words out loud. She had heard them before. Different places. Same tone. At 1903, the brass handles of the restaurant doors swung open again. A young man in a sharp navy suit stepped inside, his gait purposeful but relaxed. He adjusted the cuffs of his white dress shirt as he scanned the room, his eyes catching on Erica just as she was passing the main foyer. His mouth opened slightly. Recognition flashed across his face like a memory breaking the surface. He took 2 steps toward her and lifted his hand in a gesture that was halfway between a wave and a salute. His posture began to straighten instinctively. That reflex drilled into him from months of formation briefings and tarmac lineups. "Ma'am," he started to say. But Erica caught his movement. With the most subtle shift of her head and a barely perceptible flick of her wrist, she stopped him. He hesitated mid-step, caught the signal, and closed his mouth before the word could land. The moment stretched between them like the last second before a wheels-up call. He gave a small nod instead, one only someone who'd trained under her would recognize as both deference and understanding. The hostess, still standing nearby, had already turned her body toward the newcomer. She smiled broadly now, her voice lifting an octave as she asked if he had a reservation. When he said no, she assured him they'd make space. The assistant manager reappeared, stepping beside her like a well-timed stage cue, and extended a hand. They exchanged pleasantries while motioning toward the central seating area. Not a single glance returned to Erica. Two servers passed with menus and chilled water, both stopping to confirm if the young man would prefer the bar or the main dining room. Someone pulled a chair slightly back at a prominent window table. The lighting softened. Napkins were refolded with precision. It was as though the entire atmosphere had shifted to accommodate his presence. He shot Erica a glance again, this one tight with discomfort. She kept her expression neutral. The corners of her lips just barely lifted. Not quite a smile. More like the calm that followed a successful sortie, when you'd returned with empty pylons and fuel to spare. Her eyes told him to let it go. His shoulders eased just slightly, but his gaze lingered. The staff, oblivious, continued circling around him like satellites around a fixed point of charm and influence. A guest at a nearby table commented quietly to his partner that the young man must be a diplomat or tech exec. Another waiter nodded as if to confirm. One of the bartenders leaned over to the hostess and whispered, "Maybe someone from Lockheed." No one looked back at Erica. She turned quietly and walked along the edge of the floor. Not in a hurry, not hesitant. Her boot soles made soft taps on the marble. She passed the same abstract painting near the bar, its textures now looking more like noise than art. She made her way toward the side exit, one not intended for guests. But the staff didn't seem to care either way. The door clicked shut behind her, and the air outside was cooler than before. In the distance, base lights shimmered faintly in the desert haze. She leaned against her truck again, this time letting her shoulders rest just a little. The young man inside was probably still explaining nothing to everyone, and that was fine. He'd learned enough from her to know when silence said more than rank ever could. At 1906, Erica stepped back into the cab of her truck. The interior still held the warmth of the day. She closed the door gently, letting the quiet wrap around her. The engine stayed off. She reached into the side pocket of her flight suit, pulled out her phone, and tapped the screen to wake it. The reflection of the restaurant glowed faintly in the windshield, just behind the list of recent calls. She scrolled once and pressed on a contact labeled Base Command Desk, Ops Wing. The line clicked almost immediately. A young voice answered, clipped and alert, identifying himself as duty operations for the 57th Wing. Erica kept her tone measured. "This is Colonel Collins. I need you to patch me through to Colonel Hayes. Tell him it's regarding a community services audit, and I'll keep it under 3 minutes." There was a pause, then a calm acknowledgement. "Yes, ma'am. Please hold." She adjusted her seat slightly as the hold tone came on. Across the lot. The restaurant doors opened again and someone exited laughing. A valet handed over a set of keys. Erica watched. Silent. 30 seconds passed before a new voice picked up. "Collins, you good? What's going on?" "I need a flag on Valmont Grill," she said. "Partner location just outside Gate 9. Community access doesn't seem to align with our uniform policy accommodations. Recommend sending a check team within the hour." There was no need to elaborate. The base maintained strict guidelines for civilian businesses that participated in military appreciation programs or hosted formal base events. These venues were expected to accommodate service members professionally, regardless of attire or perceived rank. It was a condition of their status and financial partnership. Hayes didn't ask more. Roger that. I'll dispatch community liaison with MP escort. Appreciate it. Erica ended the call and dropped the phone onto the seat beside her. She didn't smile, didn't sigh. She just looked back toward the entrance and waited. At 1918, a white Tahoe with base insignia pulled into the restaurant's front lot. The vehicle stopped without sirens, lights off. The presence quiet, but unmistakable. 2 uniformed MPs stepped out, their boots hitting the ground with practiced ease. They wore standard garrison utility uniforms, sleeves rolled tight, and a calm authority that didn't require volume. A third man in business casual followed behind them, holding a clipboard and a branded folder marked with a blue Department of Defense seal. They entered through the front, not waiting to be greeted. The hostess's posture shifted instantly, her shoulders tensing as she spoke into her earpiece. The assistant manager appeared again, walking quickly from the back. He glanced toward the young man in the navy suit, who looked equally unsure now, caught in a social vortex he didn't fully understand. The lead MP addressed the manager briefly, voice low but firm. They requested to speak with whoever was on duty for management and whether their records for military partnership status were available on site. The liaison held out credentials, then moved into the dining area, scanning discreetly and making notes. No one raised their voice. No threats were made. It was a procedure, not a scene, but every guest noticed. The whisper started near the bar. A woman asked if something had happened. A man at a corner table leaned to ask if someone had complained about the food. Servers moved slower now, their steps less certain. The air had shifted. The calm wasn't comforting anymore. It was the kind that comes before a serious conversation. From the parking lot, Erica watched it unfold. The door opened once more and the young man from earlier stepped outside, adjusting his tie. He looked around, spotted her, then crossed the lot. "Ma'am," he said again, softly this time. She didn't correct him now. "Are they here because of you?" She nodded once. "I didn't say anything," he added quickly. "I know. You didn't have to." He looked back toward the door, then back at her. "You sure you don't want to go in?" "No, I already said what I needed to." They stood in silence for a moment, the noise from inside muffled by the glass. She didn't gloat, didn't explain. Her phone buzzed once, a message from Hayes. "Team's in. Thanks for the heads up. We'll pull the file for final review this week." Erica pocketed the phone and stepped away from the truck. She walked across the lot just enough to be seen through the front windows. As the assistant manager looked up and met her eyes, something in his face changed. He didn't speak. He simply nodded once, a gesture of reluctant understanding. Erica didn't return it. She turned back toward her truck and climbed in. The engine came to life quietly. She pulled out, left turn signal blinking against the pavement. Behind her, the restaurant remained lit and polished, but it no longer held the same control of the moment. That belonged to the woman who never raised her voice, never showed her stripes, and never needed to explain who she was. In the spring of 2017, the Kandahar airfield sun never really set, it just dimmed long enough to give tired crews a few hours of borrowed rest. Erica Collins, then a major, sat in the cockpit of her A-10C Thunderbolt II, visor down, left glove twitching lightly on the throttle as she listened to the ground unit's call crackling through the headset. A convoy had taken fire north of the Arghandab River, pinned near a compound with no air cover in range except her. The JTAC's voice was calm, but clipped. They were losing time. One wounded. Smoke rising. Coordinates firm. She pushed the throttle forward, banked west, and dropped altitude fast. No theatrics, just physics and muscle memory. The terrain blurred past her canopy in tan and shadow. She radioed a quick copy and flipped master arm on. No hesitation. A pass. Then another. Each run was close, deliberate, giving the Marines on the ground breathing space to extract. She heard one of them shout contact clear before the channel cut. That was all she needed. She peeled north again, holding formation with her wingman until the medevac arrived. She never mentioned the medal afterward. Someone else filed the paperwork. The Distinguished Flying Cross came by certified mail 3 months later. She kept it in the back of a drawer beneath her deployment notes, next to an old challenge coin from a CO who once told her, "You don't get respect because of your call sign. You earn it by flying like you'd land even when no one's watching." After her third tour, the Air Force offered her a staff billet at the Pentagon, a desk, a nice apartment, maybe even weekends again. She said no. Instead, she returned to the States and took a position at Laughlin AFB, eventually transferring to Nellis. She asked for a flight training squadron. They gave her the 559th and the T6 Texan II, sleek little single-engine trainers. No armor plating, no GU-8. But they had promise in their cockpits, eager hands learning trim, throttle, and trust in the air. She taught differently, less about procedures, more about moments, how to breathe at the IP, how to read a shifting wind from the edge of a canyon wall, how to feel the way a plane talks back in turbulence. Her students said she was quiet but firm. One of them once wrote in a debrief, "She doesn't fly a syllabus. She flies like she's still in theater, only she brings you home every time." She logged more flight hours in peacetime than in combat. She stood on flight lines at 0530 coffee in one hand, checklist in the other, waiting for cadets who didn't know yet what discipline felt like at altitude. She sat beside them during solo debriefs, saying little, listening more. What they didn't know at Valmont Grill was that the woman they dismissed had once kept men alive with nothing more than steel wings and precise hands, that the boots they'd scuffed glances at had touched down in more combat zones than their passports ever would, and that her silence wasn't submission. It was a form of memory, a life measured not by applause but by the echo of engines long after the mission was done. By the following afternoon, a formal email had arrived from the restaurant's general manager. It was brief, dressed in polite regret and hollow terms like misunderstanding and sincere apology. Attached was an offer for a complimentary dinner, use of the private dining room, and, notably, an invitation to return at her earliest convenience. Erica read it once, then once more. She didn't respond right away. 2 days later, she walked back into Valmont Grill. Same boots, same flight suit. This time, the fabric had been freshly pressed, no rank displayed, no medals, no ribbons. Still the same woman they had turned away. Only now, every head turned when she entered. The maitre d', not the original hostess, greeted her at the door. He extended his hand quickly and thanked her for coming. Behind him, the assistant manager stood at attention with a tight jaw and shoulders held too high, like a man uncertain whether to bow or speak. A table near the windows had been reserved with a small sign, "Reserved, with gratitude." She nodded politely, let her eyes skim the room. The couple who'd laughed that first night was not there, but 2 other guests whispered into folded napkins when they recognized her from the local base newsletter that had circulated the story. A waiter offered to take her coat, though she wore none. Another stepped in with a water glass already filled. Erica didn't sit. She took a few quiet steps toward the table, looked at the setting, the polished flatware, the folded menu with her name printed in cursive above a military insignia that had no official meaning. Someone had tried hard to craft an apology that looked expensive. She paused long enough for the silence to land. The general manager arrived from the back, all smiles, clasped hands. He offered another apology, spoken slowly and with careful enunciation. He said the team had reflected. He said the policy would be reviewed. He said this table was theirs if she still wanted it. She turned her eyes to the assistant manager. He tried to hold the gaze but faltered. There was no animosity in her face, just the weight of a decision already made. "Keep your table," she said. There was no anger in the words, just finality. She turned, nodded once more to the maitre d', and stepped back toward the door. Her exit was quiet. No parting glance. No dramatic pause. The kind of departure that left no doubt about who had the last word without needing to say another one. Outside, the sun was just starting to drop toward the edge of the horizon. A breeze lifted the loose strands of her hair as she walked to her truck. It wasn't parked in a guest space this time. The staff had made sure the front spot was held with a cone marked reserved. DOD. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Inside the restaurant, the air had changed again. Not from fear, not even shame, just awareness. The kind that stays long after the door closes, when people remember not what was said, but how little needed to be said to change everything. At precisely 13:00 hours, the auditorium at Nellis Air Force Base settled into a respectful quiet. Rows of crisp uniforms, freshly shined boots, and family members in Sunday best filled every seat. A brass quartet had just finished a solemn rendition of America the Beautiful. And now, the podium stood alone beneath the glow of muted stage lights. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and distant coffee from a side table where junior officers hovered. Captain Drew Lane adjusted his service coat as he approached the podium. His ribbons were modest, his stride steady. Just a few years ago, he had sat among the cadets, anxious about instrument check rides and fuel planning. Today, he was the keynote speaker for the annual Veterans Recognition Day at the base. Not because he had the highest rank, but because he'd asked to speak about someone who did more for him than she'd ever admit. He looked out at the audience, cleared his throat once, and began. "I want to tell you about the day I almost called a war hero ma'am in a restaurant." He smiled gently, letting the words land before continuing. "Most of you know Colonel Collins. Some of you flew with her. Some of you probably think you know everything there is to know about her. I thought I did too until that day." He paused, hands resting on the podium's edge. "I was a brand new officer then. Still thought rank was something you wore loud. I walked into Valmont Grill, dressed for a job interview I didn't want, and saw her standing there. Same flight suit she always wore, boots still dusty from the line. And I almost said it, ma'am. But she gave me this tiny gesture, like a signal during formation. And I knew not to speak." A few quiet chuckles passed through the rows, not at her, but with her. You see, she didn't need anyone in that room to know who she was. She didn't need the manager to grovel or the staff to notice her. But that was the moment I started to understand something she'd tried to teach me for months. That leadership isn't volume. It's presence. And respect. Real respect doesn't come from visible rank. It comes from how you hold yourself when no one else will hold space for you. He shifted slightly, voice softening. "We all know her record. Afghanistan, 2017. That rescue op. She never talked about it. I found out from someone else. She kept flying after that. Could have retired. Cushy post. Maybe some think tank work. But she chose to train us instead. She chose to be on the tarmac at 05:00 every day so that we could learn not just to fly, but to think like aviators. Not to impress. To endure." In the front row, a few younger lieutenants nodded. They hadn't trained with her, but they'd heard the stories. That day at the restaurant, I watched her be dismissed, ignored, judged for a uniform that most people in that room didn't understand. And then I watched what happened next. She made a phone call. No yelling, no name dropping, just precision, calm, clear, action. 15 minutes later, the base liaison team was there, not to punish, but to inspect. He leaned forward slightly. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even personal. It was a correction, a reminder that military partnerships come with obligations, and that treating someone with dignity should never depend on their wardrobe. She didn't say a word to the staff, didn't gloat, just stood tall and let the truth arrive on its own time. He glanced toward the rear of the auditorium, where Erica stood off stage in dress blues, hands behind her back, eyes steady. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes held something deeper than pride acceptance. I spoke with her after. I asked why she didn't walk back in, take the table they finally offered. You know what she said? He paused. Keep your table. Soft laughter rose again, but it faded quickly into silence. Those 3 words stayed with me. That table wasn't just furniture. It was a symbol of everything people think they can grant or withhold based on their perception of value, and she wanted no part of it. She had nothing to prove. That's what greatness looks like. Not ceremony, not medals, not even this speech. Captain Lane gestured toward the back wall, where a screen flickered on. A photo appeared Valmont Grill's entrance, taken a week after the incident. Below the polished logo, a new bronze plaque had been installed. It read, "Proud to serve those who serve. Military welcome always." That sign didn't change because of a complaint. Lane continued. It changed because someone showed what quiet power looks like, because someone taught an entire community that respect isn't transactional. It's cultural. It's foundational. He let the silence stretch just long enough. There are heroes whose names are in history books, and then there are the ones who teach us in silence. Colonel Collins never asked to be called anything. But today, I want to call her what she really is. He turned toward her, voice firm. Mentor, leader, veteran, and most of all, a guardian of what's right on the ground, just as much as in the air. The audience rose in quiet unison. No roaring applause, just the kind of stillness that meant something had landed. Backstage, Erica nodded once, then turned toward the exit. Outside, the Nevada sky had stretched wide and cloudless again. Somewhere, cadets were running checklists, and somewhere else, another woman in uniform was being judged for what she wore instead of who she was. But today, someone would remember. Someone would pause before dismissing her, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough.